The photograph changed overnight. I swear the smiling boy wasn't looking at the camera yesterday. You won't believe what happened next. Watch until the end. The basement of the Blackwood County Historical Society smelled of dust and forgotten things. Mildew clung to the corners of the ceiling, and the single light bulb swinging from above cast uneven shadows across stacks of cardboard boxes. This was my domain now. A 27-year-old archivist with a fresh master's degree and a mountain of student debt. These haven't been touched since the 1950s. Mrs. Pembroke had told me on my first day, gesturing to the rows of boxes containing records from the old Thornhill Orphanage. It's about time someone digitized them before they disintegrate completely. 3 weeks into the job, I had established a routine. Each morning, I would descend into the basement, select a box, and carefully sort through yellowed papers and faded photographs, birth certificates, death records, adoption papers, medical reports, the bureaucratic detritus of hundreds of forgotten childhoods. That Tuesday morning in October began like any other. The autumn rain tapped against the small basement window as I pulled box 17 from the shelf. Inside were records from 1900 to 1905, neatly bundled with twine that crumbled as I untied it. I was halfway through the stack when I found it. A photograph tucked between pages of intake forms. 5 children stood in a row against a plain wall, their expressions solemn except for one. While 4 of the children stared blankly at the camera, the boy in the center smiled. Not a childhood smile of innocence and joy, but something else, something knowing. His eyes seemed to look directly at me, not at the camera. I turned the photograph over. In faded brown ink, someone had written, Thornhill Orphanage, Class 1, November 1904. Something about the image unsettled me, but I couldn't quite place what. I scanned it into the database and moved on to the intake forms, logging names, dates, and circumstances. James Harper, age 10. Parents died in factory accident. Elizabeth Moore, age 11. Mother deceased, father unknown. William Turner, age 9. Abandoned. Sarah Collins, age 8. Parents deceased, influenza. I frowned, looking back at the photograph. 5 children, but only 4 intake forms. I double-checked the bundle, searching for the 5th form. Nothing. I studied the photograph again, focusing on the smiling boy. Who was he? Why wasn't there a record for him? The basement door creaked open, startling me. Emma, you've been down here for hours. Mrs. Pembroke called down. It's nearly 5. I hadn't realized how late it had gotten. I gathered my things, but hesitated before putting the photograph back. On impulse, I took a picture of it with my phone before carefully returning it to the box. That night, in my small apartment, I couldn't stop thinking about the smiling boy. I pulled up the photo on my phone and zoomed in on his face. His smile seemed wider somehow, his eyes more intense than I remembered. I shook my head. It was just my imagination, fueled by too many hours in a dimly lit basement. The next morning, I went straight to box 17 and retrieved the photograph. In the bright light of day, I studied it more carefully. The 4 solemn children wore the standard Thornhill uniform, simple, austere clothing that had seen better days. But the smiling boy in the center, his clothes were different, slightly nicer. And his smile, was he looking at the camera or slightly to the side of it? I flipped through every document in the box, searching for any mention of a 5th child. I found the class roster for November 1904. James Harper, Elizabeth Moore, William Turner, Sarah Collins. 4 names, no 5th child. I approached Mrs. Pembroke during lunch. Have you ever come across records where a child appears in a photograph but isn't documented elsewhere? I asked, trying to sound casual. She looked up from her sandwich, her glasses sliding down her nose. Not that I recall. Why do you ask? I showed her the photograph on my phone. I found this yesterday. There are 5 children, but I can only find records for 4 of them. Mrs. Pembroke squinted at the screen. The boy in the middle. Odd indeed. Perhaps his records were misplaced or filed under a different year. Maybe, I said, though something told me it wasn't that simple. Do we have any other photographs from Thornhill during this period? Checkbox 22. I believe there are some institutional photographs. Buildings, staff, classroom settings. After lunch, I found box 22 and began sifting through its contents. There were several photographs of the orphanage itself, a grim Victorian structure with narrow windows that looked more like a prison than a home for children. Photos of staff members with stiff postures and stern expressions, and then a classroom photograph from December 1904, just 1 month after the photo I'd found. The same 4 children sat at wooden desks. James, Elizabeth, William, Sarah. The smiling boy was nowhere to be seen. I found another photograph from March 1905. Again, the same 4 children, slightly older, but no sign of the 5th child. It was as if he had never existed. That evening, I couldn't help myself. I searched online for Thornhill Orphanage history and found several articles about the institution, which had closed in 1963 after operating for nearly a century. One article mentioned a local historian, Dr. Alan Bennett, who had written a book about Thornhill and other county institutions. I sent him an email, attaching the photograph and explaining my puzzle. To my surprise, he responded within an hour. Fascinating find. I've studied Thornhill extensively and have never seen this boy in any records. Could we meet to discuss? I'm free tomorrow afternoon. We arranged to meet at a coffee shop near the Historical Society. That night, I dreamt of the orphanage, of long corridors and the sound of children whispering. And throughout the dream, I felt watched by eyes I couldn't see. The next morning, I woke with a start. My phone was on my nightstand, the screen illuminated with the photograph I'd taken. I didn't remember opening it before falling asleep. As I reached for the phone, I noticed something that sent a chill down my spine. The smiling boy was now looking directly at the camera. I was certain he had been looking slightly to the side in the original photograph, and his smile, it seemed wider, more pronounced. The 4 other children seemed to have shifted slightly away from him, as if trying to increase the distance between them. I told myself it was just my memory playing tricks. Photographs don't change. I got ready for work, trying to shake off the unease. At the Historical Society, I immediately went to box 17 and retrieved the original photograph. My heart pounded as I held it under the light. The smiling boy was looking directly at the camera, just as in the version on my phone. But something else had changed too. His hand, which had been at his side in the original, was now resting on the shoulder of the boy next to him, William Turner. And William's expression, formerly blank, now showed a hint of fear. I nearly dropped the photograph. This wasn't possible. Photographs don't change. I must have misremembered the original image. That was the only explanation. I carefully returned the photograph to the box and tried to focus on my work, but my mind kept returning to the smiling boy and his shifting pose. When lunchtime came, I was relieved to have a break and eager to meet Dr. Bennett. The coffee shop was crowded with the lunchtime rush when I arrived. Dr. Bennett was easy to spot. A man in his 60s with a tweed jacket and salt and pepper beard, sitting alone with an open notebook. I introduced myself and sat down across from him. "Thank you for meeting with me," I said. "I can't stop thinking about this photograph." He nodded, his expression serious. "May I see the original?" I hesitated. "I didn't bring it. It's still at the Historical Society, but I have the digital copy on my phone." I showed him the photograph, and he studied it intently, his brow furrowing. "In all my years researching Thornhill, I've never seen this boy," he said finally, "and I've examined every existing photograph of the orphanage multiple times for my book. Could he have been a new arrival who wasn't processed yet? Or perhaps a visitor? Dr. Bennett shook his head. Thornhill was extremely strict about documentation. Every child who entered those doors was logged immediately, and visitors were extremely rare, especially children. He took out a small notebook and jotted something down. "May I ask, have you noticed anything unusual since finding this photograph?" The question caught me off guard. Unusual? Like what? He hesitated. Changes in the photograph, perhaps, or strange occurrences. Feelings of being watched. My blood ran cold. How did you know? And have you ever experienced something like this? Leave it in the comments. Instead of answering directly, he slid his notebook across the table. Inside was a sketch of a boy that looked remarkably similar to the one in the photograph. Same smile, same knowing eyes. This was described to me by a former Thornhill resident during an interview in 1978. Dr. Bennett said quietly. She called him the collector. Said he wasn't a real orphan, but something that pretended to be one. Something that fed on loneliness and abandonment. "I don't understand," I said, though a growing part of me feared that I did. According to the woman I interviewed, some of the children at Thornhill spoke of a boy who would appear to them at night, a boy who only the truly forgotten could see, a boy who offered friendship to those who had no one else and then collected them. Dr. Bennett leaned forward. "Miss Walker, I believe you found something that should have remained forgotten. And I'm afraid it may have found you too." I stared at Dr. Bennett, trying to process his words. The coffee shop around us seemed too bright, too normal for the conversation we were having. "You can't seriously believe that?" I said, though my voice lacked conviction. "It's just a photograph with a missing record." Dr. Bennett took a sip of his coffee. 20 years ago, I would have agreed with you. But I've spent decades collecting stories from former Thornhill residents. The same account, over and over. A boy who appeared to the loneliest children. A boy who wasn't in any official photographs, yet somehow showed up in personal possessions. A boy whose presence coincided with disappearances. Children who were there one day and gone the next. The official records always had explanations: adopted, transferred, ran away. But the other children knew better. He leaned forward. Tell me about the changes you've noticed in the photograph." I hesitated, then described how the boy's pose had shifted, how he now had his hand on William Turner's shoulder. Dr. Bennett nodded grimly. "It's consistent with other accounts." When I interviewed in 1978, Margaret Simmons, formerly Margaret Kelly, showed me a personal photograph she'd kept from her time at Thornhill, a group of girls at a piano. In the original photograph, there was no boy, but years later, he appeared in the background, and eventually, his hand was on her shoulder. That's impossible. So is a boy appearing in an institutional photograph with no corresponding record. He closed his notebook. "Miss Walker, I don't mean to frighten you, but I believe you may be in danger. The collector, as the children called him, forms an attachment to those who notice him, who remember him when others have forgotten." "It's just a photograph," I insisted, but my hands were trembling. "Let me show you something." He pulled out his phone and found an image. And this is from Margaret's personal collection. It was a faded photograph of 4 girls seated at a piano, and standing behind them, barely visible in the shadows, was a boy with a familiar smile. "Look at the date," Dr. Bennett said. "November 1904. The same month as my photograph. It could be a coincidence," I said weakly. "Perhaps. But I'd advise caution. Return the photograph to the archives. Try to forget about it. And if you notice anything unusual, changes in your home, items moved, sounds that shouldn't be there, contact me immediately." I nodded, thanked him, and left the coffee shop. The bright autumn day had turned overcast, and a chill wind cut through my jacket. I decided to go back to the Historical Society rather than take the rest of the day off as I'd planned. The basement felt different when I returned, darker, the shadows deeper. I went straight to box 17 and pulled out the photograph. The smiling boy's hand was still on William's shoulder, but now his head was turned slightly, as if he were whispering something in William's ear. And William's expression had changed from fear to resignation. My hands shook as I returned the photograph to the box. I needed to focus on something else, anything else. I grabbed a stack of medical records from 1905 and began inputting the data, forcing myself to concentrate on the mundane task. An hour later, I came across William Turner's medical record from January 1905. The doctor had noted, "Patient exhibits signs of extreme anxiety, claims to hear whispering at night, refuses to sleep." And then, in March 1905, patient increasingly withdrawn, speaks of a friend only he can see, recommend transfer to Lakewood Sanitarium for observation. My heart pounded. There was a final note, dated April 3rd, 1905. Patient missing from dormitory this morning. Search of grounds ongoing. I pulled out the classroom photograph from March 1905 that I'd found yesterday. William Turner sat at his desk, his face gaunt, dark circles under his eyes. And now, looking more carefully, I noticed something I'd missed before. A shadow in the doorway behind the class. A shadow with the distinct outline of a small figure. I quickly put everything away, told Mrs. Pembroke I wasn't feeling well, and left early. The walk to my apartment felt longer than usual. I kept glancing over my shoulder, unable to shake the feeling of being watched. My apartment was exactly as I'd left it that morning, yet somehow it felt different, colder. I turned up the heat and tried to distract myself with television, but my mind kept returning to the photograph, to the smiling boy, to William Turner's disappearance. That night, I dreamt of Thornhill Orphanage again. In the dream, I walked through empty corridors, following the sound of children whispering. At the end of a long hallway was a dormitory with rows of iron beds. 4 of them were occupied by sleeping children, James, Elizabeth, Sarah, and William. But William was restless, turning in his sleep as a figure sat on the edge of his bed. A boy with a wide smile who turned to look at me as I entered. "He's mine now," the boy said, his voice like dry leaves rustling. "And soon you will be too." I woke with a gasp, my room pitch black except for the glow of my phone screen. The photograph was open again, though I was certain I'd closed it before sleeping. The smiling boy was now standing slightly apart from the other children, and William Turner was gone entirely. Just 4 children now, no 3. Elizabeth Moore had vanished as well, leaving only James Harper, Sarah Collins, and the smiling boy. I dropped the phone as if it had burned me. This wasn't happening. It couldn't be happening. Photographs don't change. People don't disappear from images. I was losing my mind. I got out of bed and turned on every light in the apartment. The digital clock on my nightstand read 3:17 a.m. Too early to call anyone, too late to go anywhere. I was trapped with my thoughts and fears until morning. A soft thud from the living room made me freeze. It sounded like a book falling, but I lived alone. "Hello?" I called out, my voice embarrassingly small. No response, just the hum of the refrigerator and the distant sound of traffic. I crept toward the living room, grabbing an umbrella from the stand by my bedroom door. The room was empty, but one of my books had indeed fallen from the shelf. A history book about local institutions. It lay open on the floor, and as I approached, I saw it was open to a page about Thornhill Orphanage. I hadn't touched that book in months. I backed away, bumping into the wall. The framed photographs hanging there rattled, and one tilted askew, a photo of me at my college graduation, standing alone. My parents hadn't been able to attend. Suddenly overwhelmed, I returned to my bedroom and curled up under the covers, umbrella still clutched in my hand. I must have eventually fallen asleep, because the next thing I knew, sunlight was streaming through the windows, and my alarm was blaring. The events of the night seemed distant and dreamlike in the morning light. I convinced myself I'd had a nightmare, that the book had fallen due to an imbalance in the shelf, that I'd imagined the changes in the photograph. To prove it to myself, I checked my phone. The image was back to normal. 5 children, including William and Elizabeth, with the smiling boy in the center looking directly at the camera, his hand at his side. Relief washed over me. It had all been in my imagination, fueled by Dr. Bennett's strange theories and too many hours in a dusty basement. I got ready for work, determined to put the whole thing behind me. But as I was about to leave, I noticed something on my kitchen counter that stopped me cold. A small, yellowed piece of paper that hadn't been there the night before. On it, in faded brown ink identical to the writing on the back of the orphanage photograph, were the words, "I see you remember me. It's been so long since anyone has." I backed away from the counter, my heart hammering in my chest. This wasn't possible. I lived alone. My doors were locked, my windows secured. No one could have entered my apartment. With shaking hands, I took a photo of the note, then picked it up and shoved it into my bag. I needed to show it to Dr. Bennett. At work, I avoided the basement and instead spent the morning searching online for more information about Thornhill Orphanage. Most of what I found were dry historical accounts about its founding, operations, and eventual closure. But on a forum dedicated to local history, I found a thread titled Thornhill Mysteries. One post caught my eye. My grandmother was at Thornhill in the early 1900s. She rarely spoke about it, but when she did, she mentioned a boy who would appear at night. The staff couldn't see him, but the children could. She said he would whisper to them, promising friendship, promising to take them away from the orphanage to a place where they would never be forgotten. My grandmother was terrified of him. She said children who became his friends would disappear, and afterward, the staff and other children would have no memory of them ever existing, as if they had been erased not just from the orphanage, but from everyone's minds. I read the post 3 times, my unease growing. It matched what Dr. Bennett had told me, what I'd found in William Turner's medical records. I scrolled through the responses. My great-uncle had a similar story about Thornhill. He called the boy the Whisperer and said he collected lonely children. There were rumors that the land Thornhill was built on was an old burial ground. Could be connected. I worked at the county records office in the 1970s. There were always discrepancies in the Thornhill files, missing children who should have been there, extra names with no corresponding records. We assumed it was administrative errors, but now I wonder. I was so engrossed in the forum that I didn't notice Mrs. Pembroke approaching until she spoke. "Emma, are you feeling better today?" she asked, making me jump. "Yes, much better, thank you," I lied. "Good. There's something I wanted to show you." She placed a folder on my desk. I was going through some of my personal files at home and found this. "It might relate to your mystery boy." Inside the folder was a photocopy of a page from what appeared to be a staff journal, dated October 1904. "Thornhill welcomes a new charge today. Boy, approximately 10 years of age. No name given. No records accompanying. Found at the gates early this morning. Unusual circumstance. Boy is oddly composed for his age and situation. Has been placed with Class 1 temporarily until proper documentation can be established." My pulse quickened. This could explain the 5th child in the photograph, a new arrival who hadn't been properly documented yet. "There's more," Mrs. Pembroke said, turning the page. Another entry, dated November 2nd, 1904. "Most peculiar incident. The boy who arrived without documentation is nowhere to be found. None of the staff recall seeing him after the first day. yet no alert was raised. It is as if he was never here. Though I distinctly recall his arrival, have questioned the children of Class 1. They claim no knowledge of such a boy, save for William Turner, who became quite agitated and insisted we not speak his name. Medical examination recommended for Turner. I looked up at Mrs. Pembroke, who was watching me with concern. "Where did you get this?" I asked. "It belonged to my great-aunt, Margaret Pembroke. She was a matron at Thornhill from 1900 to 1912. She hesitated. "There's something else you should know. My great-aunt was found dead in her quarters at Thornhill in 1912. The official cause was heart failure, but in family letters from that time, there were mentions of unusual circumstances. Her room was locked from the inside, and on the wall someone had written, 'I won't be forgotten.' I stared at Mrs. Pembroke, a chill running down my spine. 'I won't be forgotten,' I whispered. She nodded, her expression grave. I never believed the family stories about Thornhill being haunted. I thought they were just tales spun by children in a grim place. But finding that journal, and now this photograph you've discovered..." She trailed off, glancing around the office as if afraid of being overheard. "Have you told anyone else about this?" I asked. "No, some things are better left in the past." She straightened her cardigan. "Emma, perhaps you should leave that photograph where you found it. Emma, box it back up. Move on to another project." But it was too late for that. Whatever was happening, it had already found me. I showed Mrs. Pembroke the note I'd found in my apartment that morning. Her face paled as she read it. "This handwriting," she said. "It's identical to my great-aunt's journal. But that's impossible. Your great-aunt died over 100 years ago." Mrs. Pembroke handed the note back to me, her hand trembling slightly. "I shouldn't have shown you the journal. I've drawn you deeper into this." "I was already involved," I assured her, though I wasn't sure if I was trying to comfort her or myself. After Mrs. Pembroke left, I called Dr. Bennett and told him about the journal entries and the note in my apartment. He agreed to meet me after work at the university library, where he had access to special collections. I spent the rest of the day in a fog, jumping at every sound, unable to concentrate. By closing time, I was exhausted from the constant state of alertness. Dr. Bennett was waiting for me in the library's special collections room, surrounded by stacks of books and folders. His expression was grim as I approached. "I've been researching since our conversation yesterday," he said without preamble. "What I've found is disturbing." He pushed an old newspaper toward me. It was the Blackwood County Gazette from April 10, 1905. A small article was circled in red. "Local boy missing William Turner, age 9, resident of Thornhill Orphanage, has been reported missing. The boy was last seen in his dormitory on the evening of April 2nd. Authorities suspect the boy may have run away, though no possessions are missing. Anyone with information is asked to contact the county sheriff's office." Next to it was another article, this one from May 1905. "Search for missing orphan called off. After a month of searching, authorities have officially ended the search for William Turner, the orphan who disappeared from Thornhill in early April. No trace of the boy has been found. Thornhill officials state that Turner had shown signs of mental disturbance in the weeks leading up to his disappearance, fueling speculation that the boy may have taken his own life." I read the articles twice, my unease growing. They didn't find him. No, and he wasn't the only one. Dr. Bennett slid another newspaper toward me, this one from February 1906. "Elizabeth Moore disappeared 10 months after William." The article was brief, just a few lines noting another runaway from Thornhill, with authorities speculating that she had gone to search for relatives in a neighboring county. "I found 7 cases between 1904 and 1912, Dr. Bennett continued. 7 children who vanished from Thornhill. All had shown signs of anxiety and reported hearing whispers at night. All mentioned a friend that only they could see. And all of them were in that photograph, I guessed. He nodded. I believe so. I've been trying to track down copies of institutional photographs from that period. It's challenging. Many records were destroyed when Thornhill closed. But based on the journal entries you mentioned and these newspaper articles, I think we're dealing with something that has existed at Thornhill for decades, possibly since its founding. But what is it? A ghost? A demon? Dr. Bennett removed his glasses and rubbed his eyes. See, the folklore of institutions like Thornhill is rich with entities that feed on misery and loneliness. Children's homes, asylums, prisons, places where people are forgotten by society. In some traditions, these entities are thought to be the accumulated negative energy of the place itself. In others, they're spirits of those who died there and couldn't move on. And you think this collector is such an entity? I think something found its way into Thornhill, something that preyed on the most vulnerable children, those who felt truly forgotten. And I think it's still active. But Thornhill closed over 60 years ago. The building closed, but records remain, photographs remain. He looked at me intently. As long as there's a memory, a connection, it can find its way back. And now it's found you. I shivered despite the warmth of the library. Oh, what do I do? First, we need to understand what we're dealing with. I've requested access to Margaret Simmons' personal papers. She donated them to the university before her death in 1982. They might contain more information about her experiences at Thornhill. And in the meantime, be vigilant. Don't look at the photograph if you can avoid it. And whatever you do, don't speak to it. Don't acknowledge it. Entities like this thrive on recognition. I nodded, trying to ignore the growing knot of fear in my stomach. Thank you for your help. Of course, and Emma, you're not alone in this. Remember that. As I left the library, the sun was setting, casting long shadows across the campus. The walk to my car felt endless, each shadow seeming to stretch toward me like grasping fingers. The drive home was no better. Twice, I thought I saw a small figure in my rearview mirror, sitting in the back seat. Each time I turned around, there was nothing there. My apartment was dark when I arrived. I didn't remember turning off the lights that morning, but perhaps I had in my rush to leave. I flipped the switch, flooding the room with light, banishing the shadows to the corners. Everything looked normal. No books out of place, no mysterious notes. Maybe it had been a one-time occurrence, a sick prank from someone who had somehow gained access to my apartment. I checked the locks on the doors and windows. All secure. I ordered takeout, not having the energy to cook, and tried to distract myself with television. But my mind kept returning to the photograph, to the smiling boy, to William Turner's disappearance. After dinner, I decided to check my phone, half expecting to find the photograph open again. It wasn't, but there was an email from Dr. Bennett sent just 20 minutes ago. Emma, I found Margaret Simmons' journals among her papers. There's something you need to see. Can you come to my office tomorrow morning, 8 a.m.? Alan. I replied with a quick affirmative and tried to settle in for the night, but sleep felt dangerous, vulnerable. Every creak of the building, every distant voice from the street below seemed ominous. When I finally did fall asleep, my dreams were fragmented and strange. Children whispering in dark corridors, a boy standing at the foot of my bed, watching me with an unblinking gaze. The photograph changing, faces disappearing one by one. I woke several times, each time checking my phone to make sure the photograph hadn't opened itself. It hadn't. But on the third awakening, at 3:17 a.m. exactly, I noticed something on my bedroom wall that hadn't been there when I went to sleep. A child's drawing, done in what looked like crayon. A stick figure with a wide smile, holding hands with another stick figure with long hair, like mine. In crude letters underneath, "My friend." I scrambled out of bed, turning on the light. The drawing was still there. I approached it cautiously, my heart pounding. It looked like it had been done by a young child, the lines wobbly, the proportions wrong. But there was something unsettling about the smiling figure. Its grin took up half its face, and its eyes were just empty circles. I touched the drawing. The crayon felt waxy under my fingertips. It was real. I hadn't imagined it. With trembling hands, I took a photo of it with my phone, then tried to remove it from the wall. It peeled off easily, as if it had been attached with children's glue. I folded it up and placed it in my bag to show Dr. Bennett. Sleep was impossible after that. I sat in my living room with all the lights on, waiting for dawn, jumping at every sound. When my alarm finally went off at 6:30 a.m., I was already dressed and ready to leave. Dr. Bennett's office was in the history department, a small room crammed with books and papers. He looked as tired as I felt, with dark circles under his eyes and a day's worth of stubble on his chin. "You found something?" I asked, as soon as I sat down. He nodded, pushing a leather-bound journal across his desk. Margaret Simmons' diary from her time at Thornhill. She was there from 1903 to 1908, so she would have overlapped with William Turner and Elizabeth Moore. I opened the journal carefully. The pages were yellowed but well preserved, covered in neat, childish handwriting. I flipped through until I found entries from late 1904, November 15th, 1904. William says there's a new boy who comes to him at night. Says the boy knows things, secret things. William won't tell me the boy's name. Says it's not safe to say it out loud. I think he's making it up for attention. December 3rd, 1904. William is acting strange. Doesn't talk to anyone anymore except when he has to. Keeps drawing pictures of a boy with a big smile. Miss Pembroke took them away and told him to stop, but he just makes more. I turned the page, my heart racing. January 20th, 1905. William tried to tell Miss Pembroke about the smiling boy again today. She sent him to the infirmary. Says he's sick in the head. But last night, I think I saw someone sitting on William's bed. It was dark, but I could see a smile gleaming in the moonlight. February 14th, 1905. Elizabeth says she can see the smiling boy now too. Says he told her he's been at Thornhill longer than anyone. Says he knows a way out. A secret place where children are never forgotten. I told her she's being silly, but she got angry and said I just can't see him because I still have hope of being adopted. The entries continued, growing more disturbing. March 28th, 1905. William doesn't sleep anymore. His eyes are always red. He whispers to himself, or maybe to someone I can't see. The other children stay away from him. I do too. April 3rd, 1905. William is gone. His bed was empty this morning. No one knows where he went. The strangest thing is that Miss Pembroke doesn't seem worried. When I asked about William at breakfast, she looked confused and said, "Who?" It's like she doesn't remember him at all. I looked up at Dr. Bennett, a chill running down my spine. She forgot him. He nodded grimly. Keep reading. April 10th, 1905. I'm scared. I found a drawing under my pillow today. A stick figure with a big smile, holding hands with a stick figure that looked like William. And now Elizabeth says she can hear the smiling boy at night, telling her that William is happy now, that he's in a place where he'll never be forgotten. She says she wants to go there too. May 23rd, 1905. Elizabeth is acting like William did. Doesn't talk to anyone, draws pictures all the time, and last night I woke up and saw her sitting up in bed, talking to the empty air beside her. But it didn't look empty exactly. It looked wrong, like the air was folded somehow, and something was hiding in the fold. The final entry about Elizabeth was dated February 2nd, 1906. Elizabeth is gone, just like William. And just like with William, no one seems to remember her. When I mentioned her name at breakfast, Sarah looked at me like I was crazy and said, "There's never been an Elizabeth in our class." but she shared a desk with Elizabeth for 2 years. How could she forget? I'm starting to think I'm the crazy one. Except I found another drawing under my pillow. The smiling boy holding hands with 2 other stick figures now, William and Elizabeth, and there was writing underneath, "You're next." I closed the journal, my hands trembling. "It's the same," I whispered, pulling the folded drawing from my bag. "I found this on my wall last night." Dr. Bennett examined the crude crayon drawing, his expression grave. "The similarity is undeniable." "What happened to Margaret after this?" I asked. "Oh, did the smiling boy take her too?" "No. According to her later entries, she was adopted just 3 weeks after Elizabeth disappeared. She left Thornhill and moved to a different county with her new family." He set the drawing aside. "I think that's what saved her. She wasn't forgotten anymore. She had a place, a family, a connection to the world. But I'm not an orphan. I have a family, connections." Dr. Bennett's expression softened. "Loneliness takes many forms, Emma. It's not about being literally alone. It's about feeling forgotten, overlooked, disconnected. The entity, the collector, senses that vulnerability." I wanted to protest, to insist that I wasn't lonely or forgotten, but something stopped me. The truth was, I did feel disconnected. My parents lived across the country, busy with their new lives after their divorce. Friends from college had scattered to different cities. My days were spent in a basement with dusty records of people long dead. "So what do I do?" I asked, my voice small. "How do I stop it?" "I've been researching all night," Dr. Bennett said, rubbing his tired eyes. "There are similar entities in folklore around the world, beings that target the isolated, that feed on loneliness. In most traditions, the way to banish them is to strengthen your connections to others, to be remembered, acknowledged, seen. That's it. I just need to not be lonely." It's not that simple, of course. This entity has already formed a connection with you. It's already begun to manifest in your reality. He gestured to the drawing. "We need to sever that connection." How? Margaret's later entries might hold the answer. She wrote about experiencing visitations for years after leaving Thornhill, seeing the smiling boy in reflections, finding drawings in her belongings, but they grew less frequent over time and eventually stopped altogether. He handed me another journal, this one from 1915, when Margaret would have been around 19. October 15th, 1915, I saw him again last night, for the first time in nearly a year. The smiling boy, standing at the foot of my bed. He looked the same as always, around 10 years old, that unnatural grin. But something was different this time. He seemed fainter somehow, less substantial. When I turned on the light, he vanished more quickly than before. I think I understand now. He feeds on being remembered, on occupying space in someone's thoughts. For years, I've tried to forget him, to push him from my mind, but that approach is flawed. The harder you try not to think of something, the more present it becomes in your consciousness. So I've taken a different approach. Instead of trying to forget him, I've been filling my mind with other things, new memories, new connections. I've been documenting everything, my daily life, my friendships, my hopes for the future, creating a record so detailed and full that there's simply no room left for him in my thoughts. And it's working. He's fading. Last night, I could see the wallpaper through his form, like he was becoming transparent. His expression wasn't smug anymore. He looked concerned, perhaps even afraid. For the first time, I feel like I might be free of him someday. I looked up from the journal. She documented everything to crowd him out of her memory. Dr. Bennett nodded. She filled dozens of journals over the years, recording every detail of her life, and in her final journal before her death in 1982, she wrote that she hadn't seen the smiling boy in over 50 years. So I need to create new memories, new connections, and document everything. It's worth trying, but there's something else Margaret did that I think was crucial. He flipped through the 1915 journal to a page near the end. Here, December 24th, 1915. I returned to Thornhill today, not inside. I couldn't bring myself to enter those gates again, but I stood outside the walls and said goodbye. Not just to the orphanage, but to William and Elizabeth and all the others who disappeared. I acknowledged their existence, their memory. I spoke their names aloud and promised they wouldn't be truly forgotten as long as I remembered them. And as I turned to leave, I saw them, just for a moment. William and Elizabeth and others I didn't recognize, standing beyond the gates. They looked peaceful, whole. Elizabeth smiled, a real smile, not the horrible grin of the collector. And then they were gone. I don't think the smiling boy was ever a child at all. I think he's something that feeds on forgotten children, on the loneliness and despair of abandoned souls. By remembering the real children of Thornhill, by keeping their memory alive, I think I've weakened his hold on them, and on me. A plan began to form in my mind. Don't I need to go to Thornhill? The building was demolished in the 1970s, Dr. Bennett warned. There's nothing left but an empty lot. It doesn't matter. It's the place that's important, not the building. I need to acknowledge what happened there. Remember the forgotten children. Dr. Bennett nodded slowly. I'll go with you. That afternoon, we drove to the former site of Thornhill Orphanage. It was now an undeveloped lot on the outskirts of town, overgrown with weeds and surrounded by a rusted chain-link fence. A small plaque near the entrance noted the historical significance of the site, but made no mention of the children who had lived and disappeared there. As we stood before the fence, I felt a heaviness in the air, as if the very ground remembered the misery that had taken place there. I took a deep breath and spoke the names I had come to know: William Turner, Elizabeth Moore, James Harper, Sarah Collins. I paused, then added, and all the others whose names have been lost. You are remembered. You existed. You matter. The wind picked up, rustling through the tall grass of the empty lot. For a moment, just a flicker at the edge of my vision, I thought I saw small figures standing among the weeds. Children with solemn faces watching us, but when I turned to look directly, there was nothing there. Did you see that? I whispered to Dr. Bennett. He nodded, his expression a mixture of awe and unease. I think they heard you. We stood in silence for a few minutes more, then returned to the car. The sun was setting as we drove back to town, casting long shadows across the road. What now? I asked. Now, you document, create, connect. Dr. Bennett's voice was firm. Fill your life so completely that there's no room for the collector in your thoughts. That night, I began a journal, recording everything that had happened since finding the photograph. I wrote about Dr. Bennett, about Mrs. Pembroke, about Margaret Simmons and her detailed accounts. I wrote about William and Elizabeth and the others, ensuring their stories wouldn't be lost again. When I finally went to bed, exhausted but somehow lighter, I half expected to find another drawing or to see the smiling boy standing in the shadows. But my apartment was quiet, undisturbed. The next morning, I went to work with renewed purpose. Instead of dreading the basement archives, I saw them as a chance to preserve the memories of those who had been forgotten. Each record I digitized, each name I entered into the database was a life acknowledged. Days passed without incident. No more drawings appeared on my walls. My phone didn't open to the photograph by itself. I began to hope that maybe, just maybe, it was over. Then, exactly 1 week after our visit to the Thornhill site, I woke in the middle of the night. My bedroom was dark, but I could sense I wasn't alone. A figure stood at the foot of my bed, small, child-sized, with that unmistakable smile gleaming in the darkness. My heart raced, but I forced myself to remain calm. I turned on the bedside lamp. The smiling boy was there, but just as Margaret had described in her journal, he seemed less substantial than before. I could see my dresser through his form, like he was made of smoke or mist. "I remember them," I said firmly. "William, Elizabeth, all of them. They won't be forgotten again." His smile faltered for the first time. He took a step toward me, but his movement was jerky, uncertain. "You have no power over me," I continued, my voice growing stronger. "I'm not alone. I'm not forgotten." He opened his mouth as if to speak, but no sound came out. Instead, a look of frustration crossed his face. He reached toward me, his transparent fingers stopping just short of my arm. I held my ground, refusing to flinch away. "Go back to the darkness, Collector. There's nothing for you here." For a moment, his form seemed to solidify, his smile widening to impossible proportions, stretching across his face in a grotesque parody of joy. Then, like mist under a strong wind, he began to dissipate, unraveling at the edges. Just before he vanished completely, I caught a glimpse of something behind him, other children, watching from the shadows of my room. But these weren't his victims. Their expressions were solemn but peaceful, and they regarded the smiling boy not with fear, but with pity. William was there, and Elizabeth, and others I recognized from the records I'd been digitizing. They hadn't been forgotten after all. They'd been remembered, acknowledged, freed. The smiling boy gave one last desperate lunge toward me, his form now barely visible. Then, with a sound like a distant sigh, he was gone. The other children lingered a moment longer, their presence a gentle reassurance rather than a threat. Elizabeth, or the child I believed to be her, smiled softly and nodded once before they too faded away. I sat in the silence of my room, trembling not with fear, but with a strange sense of completion. It was over. I knew it as surely as I knew my own name. The next day, I returned to the Historical Society and went straight to box 17. The photograph was exactly where I'd left it, tucked between intake forms. With steady hands, I took it out and examined it. 5 children stood in a row against a plain wall. 4 with solemn expressions, and 1, the boy in the center, with no expression at all. His face was blurred, as if someone had rubbed an eraser over it, leaving just a smudge where his features should have been. I turned the photograph over. In faded brown ink, it still read, "Thornhill Orphanage, Class 1, November 1904. But below that, in fresh blue ink that could only have been added recently, were 5 names: James Harper, Elizabeth Moore, William Turner, Sarah Collins, and 1 more, written in a different hand, in ink that seemed to shimmer slightly on the paper. The forgotten one. I carefully placed the photograph back in the box, knowing it would remain there. A record of what had happened, but no longer a portal for the collector to enter our world. That evening, I added a final entry to my journal about the Thornhill incident, then began a new one. This one about my life, my hopes, my connections to the world. Just as Margaret had done, I would fill my days so completely that there would never again be room for the smiling boy in my thoughts. Sometimes, on dark nights when the wind rattles my windows, I think I catch a glimpse of something in the corner of my eye, a shadow that moves independently, a flash of a smile, but it's fainter each time, more distant, less real. And on my wall, where once an eerie crayon drawing appeared, there now hangs a framed photograph of me with new friends, smiling genuine smiles, our arms around each other's shoulders, none of us forgotten, none of us alone. If you want to hear more whispers from the darkness, follow this channel. The next story might be closer than you imagine.